Mother love me long time, long time. Sucky, sucky, fucky, fucky, one ton, Hong Kong, Hong Kong. One ton, Hong Kong, one ton. One time, one time, one ton. Love me long time, feed of my long slong. Go back to Hong Kong, I'll send you back to Hong Kong. Para one ton, love me. Mother love me long time, long time. Sucky, sucky, fucky, fucky, one ton, Hong Kong, Hong Kong. One ton, Hong Kong, one ton. One time, one time, one ton. Love me long time, feed of my long slong. Go back to Hong Kong, I'll send you back to Hong Kong. Para one ton, love me. Mother love me long time, long time. Sucky, sucky, fucky, fucky, one ton, Hong Kong, Hong Kong. One ton, Hong Kong, one ton. One time, one time, one ton. Love me long time, feed of my long slong. Go back to Hong Kong, I'll send you back to Hong Kong. Para one ton, love me. Mother love me long time, long time. Sucky, sucky, fucky, fucky, one ton, Hong Kong, Hong Kong. One ton, Hong Kong, one ton. One time, one time, one ton. Love me long time, feed of my long slong. Go back to Hong Kong, I'll send you back to Hong Kong. Para one ton, love me. Mother love me long time, long time. Sucky, sucky, fucky, fucky, one ton, Hong Kong, Hong Kong. One ton, Hong Kong, one ton. One time, one time, one ton. Love me long time, feed of my long slong. Go back to Hong Kong, I'll send you back to Hong Kong. Para one ton, love me.
Calling all units, I repeat, calling all units. Shots are fired. I need backup right now. Shots are fired.
Mother love me long time.
Calling all units, I repeat, calling all units. Shots are fired. I need backup right now. Shots are fired.
Mother love me long time, long time. Sucky, sucky, fucky, fucky, one ton, Hong Kong, Hong Kong. One ton, Hong Kong, one ton. One time, one time, one ton. Love me long time, feed of my long slong. Go back to Hong Kong, I'll send you back to Hong Kong. Para one ton, love me. Mother love me long time, long time.
Shots are fired. I need backup right now. Shots are fired.
Alright, this should be all good. Can everybody hear me in the chat? Yes. I got the wrong thing. There we go. Here we are. Alright, everybody. Sorry about that. I wasn't in studio mode, so anyone who knows anything about OBS would know that this is a problem. And I can see everybody in the chat. I got Rawhide. How you going, Rawhide? I've got Blank, who some of you might know. What's going on? Sir Oswald Mosley, I see. But anyway, today we are watching Shaun. Shaun is a left-wing YouTuber, often part of this movement known as the New Left, as it has been coined by people like Dr. Layman, who are supposedly, according to him, meant to take over YouTube. As a lot of us know, this skeptic community, and even to a lesser extent the conservative community online, or the right-wing community, has been around for a while. You know, they've kind of been around the block. They've responded to every wage gap BuzzFeed video, every Black Lives Matter shitlib article that there is. And so, after a while of just refuting the same points over and over again, people get lazy with their content. And so, this is prime opportunity for a new ideological group to come in and start making videos and capitalizing off the laziness of right-wing content creators. And so I thought I would respond to one of these videos, that is Shaun. And so I got a super chat here by Epic Burgerman 769, $5. I'm so happy I found this channel. Keep up the great work, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you for the super chat. So I believe you guys should be able to can you guys see the frame here? Hold on a second. Window capture. I forgot to set up the second frame. I'll do that for a second, because you guys don't want to see my face here. Sorry about that. Sorry about the delays here. But, you know, sometimes this shit happens. Who else is in the chat? I got Sucky Sucky Fun with True Diltom. Yeah, I hope you guys liked that, that intro. I thought that was very appropriate for some reason. This guy we're about to listen to, he often goes by Salad Fingers, actually, because he sounds like Salad Fingers. He sounds like he needs some rusty spoons, if you know what I mean. If you guys remember that, that was a Flash animation from back in the day on like Newgrounds when that was a thing. So, nonetheless, let us transition. Okay, there we go. Let's have a gaze then. So here you can see the title of the video is a response to Roaming Millennials, People of Color, You Are Not Oppressed. And so it should be said, I have not seen the original Roaming Millennial video he is responding to. I just saw the title and thought I would probably agree with the premise he is trying to refute, and so I clicked it. So here we go.
Hello everyone. Today I'd like to take a look at a video from a YouTuber by the name of Roaming Millennial entitled People of Color, You Are Not Oppressed. And wouldn't that be nice? That's right, new subscribers from the Cuphead video. I usually talk about politics and history and all that boring stuff. I feel the need to apologise here. Okay, so for everyone else who is still with us, who is Roaming Millennial? Well, she's one of the YouTubers in the I'm not a racist, but vein. You know, so she's not a racist. Okay.
So, goddamn, this is... it's already exhausting and we are 40 seconds in. You can see already that Shaun is more comfortable falling back on his default means of coursing people, which is shaming and gossiping, as opposed to argumentation. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I would think Shaun is trying to convey Roaming Millennial, like he just said, as one of these I'm not racist but types that are still considered racist by leftists, obviously. Which makes sense, because the only reason anyone has to preface their honest opinion with I'm not racist but is because that belief is somewhere to the right of people like Shaun and his viewers. It is a form of speech policing that serves to push the Overton window leftward. Now, I have some more super chats I'm going to read. I have Pragmatic Culture, $5. What are you doing to stop Globo Homo this month? True Dimmadome. Thanks, man, for the $5. I have another one from $2 from Robert Chalk. Wonton. That is true. And then Augusto Jose Raymond Pinochet with $20. I appreciate that a lot, man. That goes a long way. And he says, like your stuff, mate, with a helicopter there. So, thank you. Alright. Let's keep going.
Okay, acknowledged she's not a racist, but she's got a few questions, you know. So I'm going to do my good deed for the day here and provide the answers to those questions. Just one YouTuber helping another YouTuber out. So what is Roaming Millennial's video about? Well, I would encourage you to watch the whole thing, and I'll put a link in the description. But I'll show a couple of short clips here just to get us started off.
So in this video, in the hopes of healing this headache of imaginary oppression that is going around the social justice sphere, we're going to be talking all about oppression. What it means to be oppressed and how in the United States and in the rest of the Western world, no, people of color, you are not oppressed. So to start, let's go over the definition of oppression. And yes, I know this is super basic, but after hearing those students protest, I really do feel that cracking a dictionary open is necessary. So the definition of oppression is really quite simply prolonged cruel or unjust treatment or control. Now with this definition, I think it is perfectly clear to say that in the past, people of color, and more specifically African American people, were oppressed by societies in the United States and the West in general. I'm not going to argue against that. However, the issue here is that these evergreen students and so many social justice warriors out there are not just arguing for the idea of past oppression, but for current and ongoing oppression. And really, that is just a completely inaccurate analysis of the world that we live in. Obviously, in the United States, there are no legal rights that a white person possesses that a non-white person does not, and there are no laws on the books that reference an individual's race in any way, right? I mean, our legal system, our entire system of government is not one that is racially coded.
Okay, so here's the main thrust of Roaming Millennials.
And before I keep playing, I'm just going to say this video will be playing clips out longer than in the last time where we watched 3 hours, simply because Shaun is a bit of a slow talker, and he's also responding to a video where he plays like pretty long clips of that video in its entirety. And we don't really disagree with the original video, but and besides little nitpicky pedantic things that roaming millennial might have said, but just a preface. So let's continue.
Argument. Oppression may have happened in the past, and that's good. She concedes that much at least.
Okay, so before he gets to his point, I'm just gonna say that he says this like this makes her unlike other right-wingers that speak about race. I mean, find me any right-wing YouTuber that doesn't concede this point. I mean, you would be hard-pressed to find someone at the right stuff or etc. that doesn't concede that blacks and minorities have been oppressed in the past. And whatever conclusions they might draw from that is another thing. However, I've heard Richard Spencer talk about how slavery was an awful injustice dozens and dozens of times. Like, it's just, everyone on the right concedes that. No one doesn't say that blacks weren't oppressed. It'd just be ridiculous, but let's continue.
But today, we have legal equality, so that means oppression is not happening at all. Now, the first mistake she's made here is a rather basic one, and it's one you see a lot online. Roaming millennial is only considering legality. She showed the dictionary definition of a...
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually not going to disagree with this 100%. I would say that the state, or its parts that coerce by means of hard power, can surely oppress, but people using non-aggravated means, such as exclusion or discrimination, to direct people or society in some way is not oppression. For instance, in the private sector, if I don't want to do business with a black guy because he's black, you may think this is horrible for whatever reason, and maybe it is, but it's surely not oppressive, contrary to what many people on the left might think. This is why the definition put forward here, if you actually Google it, it will say by authority here. I might actually just do that real quickly. Actually, no, but you can trust me. If you just Google it, type in the word oppression definition, and this has actually been updated to include the word authority. So that is to say, in a situation of reciprocity, such as between two non-violent citizens, this definition seems to not apply. Now, the point of convergence I have with Shaun is that if society has decentralized tacit conflicts between groups that, although aren't manifested in a violent, oppressive, or legal way, so to speak, but are trying to... I'm sipping right now, so I'm burping a bit. But are trying by implicit means to serve the function of something violent and oppressive. This is clearly a big problem for social cohesion. I mean, moreover, the problem of races being at each other's throats is bad economically, as the low trust serves as a transaction cost. It is bad socially, because intergroup conflict can erupt easily, and it's bad civically, because it decomposes the unity that different groups have towards a central society and its goals towards prosperity and stability and etc. So yeah, if someone says that if it's not in the law books, it doesn't matter, then yeah, I would agree that they are wrong.
Oppression, prolonged, cruel or unjust treatment or control, but appears to have misread it. Legal rights are not mentioned here. Oppression can still happen even within a legal system that is...
So as we just mentioned, that if you actually go look up the definition, it does say authority there, so that is a major, that does kind of contradict what Shaun is saying.
On paper, completely equal and just, because the system isn't perfect, of course. It's made up of individuals, all with their own beliefs and biases, and the sum of those beliefs and biases can add up to a system that appears fair on the surface, but delivers unfair results.
Okay, and here is another point of divergence. I spoke about social or societal attitudes just now in terms of stability, costs, unity, etc. And Shaun here is speaking in terms of fairness, which of course is an incredibly loaded word that when spoken of on a societal level reeks of John Rawls. And obviously I would disagree here. I don't think another person's thoughts about me can be unjust, as is the conclusion one must reach when you say that a group of people's attitudes, biases, and thoughts are unfair, and furthermore, justice is fairness vis-a-vis John Rawls, and from this, it would necessarily follow that their thoughts are also unjust. So, This is where the debate between cultural libertarianism and cultural authoritarianism emerges from. Now, am I a cultural libertarian? I mean, no, I believe that the West must be upheld, and that someone that goes against traditional Western norms is infringing on an intergenerational investment that my ancestors upheld through great bloodshed for centuries on end. But my point isn't to defend that, but to say this is why people would accuse Shaun of being a cultural authoritarian, something that Shaun would probably deny, I would imagine. Now, we do have some more super chats, which I'll need to get to. So we have the Margaret, $5. Amidst all the vain and vapid preening, the one true cultural illusion is in the chat drops like a dead seagull into an ocean of ignorance. Now, I've actually read that dozens and dozens of times about the chat dropping like a seagull into an ocean of ignorance, and someone has to explain to me why that is. But yeah, let's continue.
But we'll loop back around to this in a second. For now, let's watch the next part of Roaming Millennial's argument where she attempts to address these unfair results.
And while, in my opinion, equal standing in the eyes of the law and equal standing before government is a pretty clear indication that oppression is not happening, some critics might say, no, what are you talking about? There's no equal standing. There are huge racial disparities when it comes to the legal system, especially the criminal justice system. Just look at how much more likely black people are to be incarcerated than Hispanic or white people. I mean, obviously that's the result of oppression. Okay, so to answer the question of oppression in relation to the criminal justice system, which comes up a lot, we first need to return to our definition of oppression. To repeat once more, oppression is prolonged, cruel, or unjust treatment or control. So what this definition means for our discussion here is that black people being more likely to be incarcerated is not evidence in and of itself to prove that they are oppressed. Oppression refers specifically to unjust treatment or unjust punishment. So for oppression to be happening, black people would need to be incarcerated unjustly at a higher rate than other races, right? Because it wouldn't be oppression if these people were being justly arrested and prosecuted for crimes that they actually did commit. So while many social justice activists try to paint the large black prison populations in the US as evidence of oppression, the fact is that black people are more...
Just some advice for Roaming Millennial. It's not a good idea to have Fox News in the corner, just because I don't think there is a single less reputable source in a leftist's mind than Fox News. I mean, I have a soft spot for Fox News and Tucker Carlson and all of that, but just from the perspective of Shaun, he's probably raging at that logo right there. But let's continue.
More likely to commit crimes than other races. So with this being the case, it is not unjust and therefore not oppressive for the racial makeup of prison populations to be representative of the racial makeup of people who commit crimes. The question here isn't, are there proportionately more black people in prison than white people? Because obviously that's the case. The question is why? Is it because prejudice causes more black people than white people to be convicted of crimes that they did not commit? Or is it because on average a black person is more likely to commit a crime than a white person and therefore more likely to go to jail for what they've done? Statistics would indicate the latter.
Statistics would indicate the latter, apparently. Well, we'll see. Now then, Roaming Millennial makes several errors in this section. Some are errors of mathematics, some...
I'm just gonna interject and read the super chats. Shaun should really summarize the clips that he's about to play, and then just play a shorter clip because it would just make the video more digestible. But I have a super chat from Philip J. Fry, $10. Thanks, man. I greatly appreciate it. Alt Hype has a great response to the oppressed minorities argument in his video Starbucks Racism. When you look at actually oppressed groups, it's always about the oppressed escaping the oppressor. I have not actually seen that video. I am a big fan of Alt Hype, and yeah, I love his videos, but I haven't seen that specific one, but let us continue.
Errors of omission, and a couple of contradictions of logic there too. I don't know where to start, really, to be honest. But how about we start with this statement of Roaming Millennials. For oppression to be happening, black people would need to be incarcerated unjustly. You see, her point here is that black people are more likely to commit crimes than other races, so it makes sense for them to be a larger percentage of the prison population. So first of all here, what she does not examine, possibly on purpose, is whether or not these percentages match up, because that's important. And I'll give you two scenarios here.
I love that possibly on purpose jab there. I don't think I've ever gone through a left-wing person's video without them making claims to malintent on the other person's side. It's just typical.
So, scenario 1. Let's say one group of people are 10% more likely to commit crimes than other groups of people and also make up 10% extra of the prison population. Now that's what you'd expect in a fair system, at least without factoring wider society into our little example here anyway. Now, scenario 2. One race of people are 10% more likely to commit crimes than other races, but make up 30% extra of the prison population. Now that's unfair and unjust treatment, even accounting for that hypothetical group's higher relative criminality. Do you understand? So returning to reality, which of our little scenarios there more accurately reflects the criminal justice system in the United States? Well, one way to answer this question is to look not at how certain groups are treated within the system, but how individuals belonging to those groups are treated. So let's do that. And here's a study from 2013 from the Yale Law Journal entitled Mandatory Sentencing and Racial Disparity, Assessing the Role of Prosecutors and the Effects of Booker. And I'd like to read you a few lines from their conclusion. We agree that the high rate of incarceration of black men is a serious social problem, and that examining the possible contribution of disparities in the criminal justice system is important. Our research suggests that in the federal system, disparities in the post-arrest justice process contribute to this problem. After controlling for the arrest offence, criminal history and other prior characteristics, sentences for black male arrestees diverge substantially from those of white male arrestees by about 10% on average. While this disparity does not seem to be growing, it is persistent. So, did you like that study? Because here's another.
Okay, so before he goes into that, the study we have here doesn't conclude what Shaun thinks it does. Most states have laws that mandate higher sentencing for people with criminal records because naturally they are more likely to reoffend. So if black men make up 6% of the population and just around half of all violent criminals, then we would also predict them to be serving longer sentences, as is, the infamous statistic states 1 in 3 black males will be incarcerated sometime in their life, or more specifically, only 20% of black defendants are in the lowest criminal history category, as conducted by one study, which I will put in the description, compared to 45% of whites. While also when black people are arrested, they are more likely to have weapons on them, which would lead to a longer sentence. And thirdly, blacks are less likely to be able to afford a private attorney, so being left to an appointed attorney is obviously more likely to land you a longer sentence also. So all this to say, if excuse me, if you have a white inmate and a black inmate standing side by side, it's more likely to be the white inmate's first time in prison and is hence likely to have a lower sentence length. Now, everyone watching this knows these statistics on this, and I won't spend my time going over what you already know, so I'll leave the studies that support this in the description. But if we actually go and read that second little paragraph that he has under this highlighted section here, it says, second, the procedural source of this disparity matters, and it is thus a mistake to focus on judicial sentencing alone. Our research suggests that racial disparities in recent years have been largely driven by the cases in which judges have the least sentencing discretion, those with mandatory minimums. But mandatory minimums. So as you can see, this study even agrees with me. It says that prior criminal history is a possible explanation for the divergence between white and black prison sentences, and in no way does it conclude what Shaun says it does. But let's continue.
Persistent. So, did you like that study? Because here's another. This is a United States Sentencing Commission report entitled Report on Continuing Impact of United States v. Booker on Federal Sentencing. And what did that find? The Commission's updated multivariate regression analysis showed, among other outcomes, that black male offenders have continued to receive longer sentences than similarly situated white male offenders. And how much longer were their sentences? This is from later in the report. For example, sentence length for black male offenders exceeded sentence length for white male offenders by 19.5%. And I should note here that I found both of these reports in an article responding to Roaming Millennial on pathos.com, which I will link in the description. So that's fairly clear cut there, I think. on an individual level, controlling for all the factors except race, black men still get longer sentences than white men. And because they get longer sentences than white men, they will on average be in prison for longer, and therefore at least some part of their overrepresentation in the prison system is accounted for by this unfair sentencing.
Okay, so none of those studies actually say what Shaun thinks it does. So it does not say that when you account for everything except race, the gap is still there. This is Shaun's own conclusion that he has drawn from the study completely unwarrantedly, not the conclusion of the researchers. While also throughout the study, the authors give several reasons as to what could account for the what different factors they have not. So they just had a stroke. So they give the variables that could account for these gaps, but never attribute these differences in sentencing to discrimination or racism. So again, Shaun is not citing this study correctly. Now, I read the abstract of the first study that he cited, and funnily enough, it turns out that the first study he cites was actually intended to refute the methodology of the second one that he cites. So if we go here, this is the study, and if you just go Control F, Sentencing Commission, so that is the people who did the people who did the second study. If you go to that, Control F, so we can find paragraph upon paragraph of why Shaun's second study is contradicted by the evidence found in the Yale Journal study we are looking at right now. So firstly, here in the abstract, it says, in contrast, we use a dataset that traces cases from arrest to sentencing, allowing us to assess Booker's effects on disparities in charging, plea bargaining, and fact-finding, as well as sentencing. We disentangle background trends by using a rigorous regression discontinuity-style design, contrary to other studies, and in particular, the dramatic recent claims of the US Sentencing Commission. So that is this first study saying that his second study has over-dramatic conclusions. But furthermore, it continues, we find no evidence that racial disparity has increased since Booker, much less because of Booker. Unexplained racial disparity remains persistent, but does not appear to have increased following the expansion of judicial discretion. And then if we scroll down, it says in the introduction here, this is the second mention of that study. It says, a few studies, most notably the Sentencing Commission's Booker study, that's his second one, compounds this problem further by also controlling for differences in guidelines departure rates, filtering out one of the key aspects of the final sentencing decision as well. And so you can see here that they're saying that the second study cited by Shaun is insufficient and does not control all of the variables, such as mandatory sentencing, as this study goes on to use as one of the explanations for this gap. And then there was another one down here. So this is just the third use of the word. You can see me literally just clicking down the Control F. We begin that inquiry with a simple linear time trend analysis, which shows that when one measures sentence disparity in the broader way that we recommend, unexplained black-white disparity did not grow between 2003 and 2009, the period in which the Sentencing Commission found that it quadrupled. Indeed, our estimate of the disparity trend is negative. So you get the point. The second study Shaun cites is refuted by the first one, and hence I would advise Shaun to revisit his sources and pick the one that is the most updated on the available evidence, i.e. the first one that we have right here. Now, there is actually another study by the exact same authors, Sonja B. Starr and M. Marit Rahavi, entitled Racial Disparity in Federal Criminal Statistics, which if we scroll down to page 15, it says, where is it? It says, however, these sentencing judge records, whether the final conviction is under a statute triggering, sorry, I'm just getting a, Alright, that's not the... I'll just fucking Control F. I have the quote written down. Yeah, here we go. It says, however, these differences may not be solely the result of race. The black and white defendant pools differ on two key legally relevant dimensions. First, black defendants on average have more extensive criminal histories. Only 20% of black defendants are in the lowest criminal history category compared with 45% of white defendants, as I said earlier. And second, there are differences in the distribution of arrest offenses. Table 1 contains the distribution of arrests across broad offense categories. For example, black defendants are more likely than white defendants to be arrested for weapon offenses. Black arrestees are also more likely to have at least one aggravating factor noted in the written description of the arrest offense. And in addition, there are differences in observables that, while not legally relevant, could be correlated with case outcomes, in particular socioeconomic status. Black arrestees are more likely to be sufficiently poor to qualify for a publicly funded attorney, 84% compared with 60%, and 43% of black arrestees are high school dropouts compared with only 29% of whites. These differences in defendant and case characteristics could explain at least part of the observed disparities in sentence and incarceration. That is the exact same people that Shaun is citing to conclude that all of the variables have been considered except race, and hence it is racism. So it would seem that Shaun didn't investigate the studies he was actually citing, and so just to summarize again, the second study cited by Shaun does not consider all of the variables that the first study does, while secondly, the first study comes to the conclusion that it is said non-racial variables, such as mandatory sentencing laws, that account for the difference in sentence lengths. And thirdly, this is further evidenced by other studies conducted by the exact same individual researchers who Shaun is citing. But let's continue. But before we do that, I had a super chat I wanted to read. So Pragmatic Culture, $2. True Dunkin' Donuts is a boomer. Ori Hapri, 2018. He is a friend of mine. Thanks, Ori. And thanks, Pragmatic, for the $2. And then I have Ori here, who I just mentioned. 2077, watching Australian monarchist critique ambiguously, European leftist critique ambiguously, Asian alt-right roasty. Thanks for the $5. Then I have $5 from Gresh. Do you know H. Bomber Guy? He's another leftist who's rebutted Paul Joseph Watson and Sargon and others. I'd love to see you cover a video of his. Yeah, I do know about him. I've never watched one of his videos, but I do know who he is. He's another one of these new left types. And yeah, I will definitely get around to that. I would like to make this a series of watching these guys. But anyway, let us continue with the video.
Any argument for this to be fair that mentions black people's increased relative likelihood of being criminals would have to therefore argue that individual black people deserve longer individual sentences relative to other races. And this is without considering that the very metric we're using to declare black people's increased relative criminality is frequency of occurrence in the criminal justice system, which we've just proven is biased against them. And it's not just on the
No, you have not.
prosecution end that black people get screwed over. One fact I like to bring up here is that black people are several times more likely than white people to be arrested for marijuana possession, even though black people and white people smoke weed at similar rates.
Okay, so this is a very famous claim made by the left. We've seen this on Young Turks a lot of the times, and you just have to ask again, did they control for prior criminal history? Because you are likely, as a teenager smoking weed, to get a slap on the wrist if you don't have a prior criminal record. So yeah, at least in some states. So yeah, it's the same thing occurs. You haven't considered all of the variables that could explain this.
It's all well and good to have a fair and just system on paper, but that doesn't mean the system necessarily delivers fair and just results. For oppression to be happening, black people would need to be incarcerated unjustly, said Roaming Millennial, and she's correct. They are, so therefore it is, if you follow. So to move on here, Roaming Millennial there mentioned the black crime rate as justification for a relatively high incarceration rate compared with other races. And I'd like to ask a question here. What would Roaming Millennial argue is the cause of that higher crime rate? And there's only two answers, really.
I mean, this is, like, one can say there is not sufficient information to make a call. One doesn't have to give an answer to, like, explain why the disparity exists. But if we control for all variables and the only one left that can predict these differences is race, then the cause of these differences is probably racial, whether that be the biological components of race or other racial differences, such as culture. As a boomer conservative might say, it's rap music that accounts for these differences.
There's the genetic/racist argument. Black people are inherently by birth more likely to be...
Okay, so you are now calling a descriptive claim about the world racist, which necessarily, in virtue of some claims being true, means there must be racist truths, i.e. hate facts. So obviously this is very transparent to us watching. This is simply Shaun trying to police people away from believing certain things, not because of the data, but because of words like racist, that just really identify whether someone supports Shaun's political ideology.
Criminals. And there's the societal argument. The disparity is explained by a combination of cultural and socioeconomic factors alongside the aforementioned bias in the justice system. And as a little aside here, one annoying thing you tend to see online is someone who secretly favours the genetic argument but fears saying it.
Okay, so now we can see Shaun is going to adopt the same tactics as 3 Arrows did in one of the last streams. So he's going to make appeals to extremism. Well, sorry, I have asthma, so I keep coughing. He's going to make appeals to extremism while also claiming there is a racist conspiracy amongst these popular right-wing YouTubers, and then trying to decipher something they believe that isn't what they have put on record. So let us continue.
Out loud. So they just dismiss the societal factors one by one as being irrelevant without ever actually committing to the genetic argument. And that can be a little irksome.
But, again, what if it is genetic? The world isn't one of comfortable truths, and we need to just accept that, you can't just not believe something because it's scary to you.
Anyway, which argument does Roaming Millennial put forward? And I'll read a couple of Twitter conversations here. Roaming Millennial says, minority communities on average have more crime than mixed or majority white communities. That leads to increased cop encounters. And a Twitter user called Flying Volvo says, really makes you think about what causes it, doesn't it? Almost like there's some underlying causes of crime in African American communities. To which Roaming Millennial responds, poverty and culture.
Okay, so here Roaming Millennial says it's not genetic, thereby strengthening the conspiratorial nature of what Shaun is saying. Well, also we can see here that this is typical leftists trying to coerce people's belief by shaming rather than argumentation, which really fucking annoys me, but let's continue.
So it appears here that Roaming Millennial favours the socio-economic argument. Poverty is linked with crime, after all, and increased poverty in predominantly African American areas would explain the disparity in the crime statistics. However, with regards to our oppression argument here, we necessarily have to consider the causes of that poverty. Because it's entirely possible that the poverty argument is simply the genetic argument again, but one step removed from what will get you banned off Twitter. If the poverty's causes are unexamined, an audience might assume that black people are genetically more likely to be in poverty due to...
Okay, or it could be explained by the second variable Roaming Millennial put forward, culture. Again, the boomer conservatives would say that it's rap music and Democrat welfare state policies that have destroyed the black family, and thus because 85% of blacks grow up without a father in the house, they are more likely to be poor. Which, is statistically true for individuals in that having a single mother makes you much more likely to be impoverished as an adult than having two parents. But, let's say I don't submit to your name calling. Let's say I don't want your approval and I just go out and say, yeah, it's probably genetic. I mean, now what? Are you just going to call me a racist and walk away? That's fine. I don't care one bit. I don't want your approval. So either engage my arguments or walk away, and don't expect me to want to be seen as a good person in your eyes, let alone an exponent of your political beliefs, because I simply don't. I just don't care. I don't want your approval. Either argue with me or just get out of here. I don't care if you think I'm a racist. So where does the conversation go from there if someone's like, yeah, it's genetic? It sounds like from this video, you've just blanket said this is not true without engaging in any argumentation on the matter, and then decided that anyone that can fall back or be tied back to this genetic argument is just immediately wrong, like you're trying to do with roaming millennial. But yeah, let's continue.
Possessing some inherent poverty-related characteristics, and therefore, by proxy, more likely to be criminals. Now, we know that roaming millennial has previously stated that oppression existed in the past. So the question here is, could that past oppression have contributed to creating the current poverty? So I guess we have to ask, how far in the past is roaming millennial talking when she says oppression existed? And returning to Twitter again, a Twitter user called Hip Hop is Knowledge said, "My parents weren't even allowed to drink from water fountains in public, you dumb fuck." To which roaming millennial responds, "No one's denying institutionalized racism/oppression existed in the past, literally no one, but that's not indicative of current policies." Now this exchange indicates that roaming millennial considers the Jim Crow laws that enforced racial segregation in the United States to be examples of institutionalized racism and oppression. Very good, I'm with her on that. Now these laws were in place until the mid-1960s. So, from the Declaration of Independence up until roughly 50 years ago, according to roaming millennial, there was institutionalized racism and oppression in the United States. So, accepting that, it would be very bizarre indeed to then go on to claim that such a long period of racism and oppression would have zero effects whatever on current society.
Okay, so, maybe it does. Maybe there is some intergenerational poverty created from centuries of past oppression. But here's the thing. Even if you control for socioeconomic status, the gap between blacks and whites and criminality still remains. And of course, he's just going to assert this verbatim that it's the intergenerational oppression. He's not actually going to show the data that controls for economic status and criminality. So if you take black Americans that are born rich and white Americans born poor, the black Americans born rich, born with a head start, as it were, are still more likely to be in poverty and to be criminals than white Americans who are born poor. I have a study here entitled, where is it? Here we go. Race and Economic Opportunity in the United States, an Intergenerational Perspective from the National Bureau of Economic Research. We can see a wide variety of data and information and graphs explaining this. If we scroll down, you can see the methodology. And here are the graphs. But the thing is, there's actually a New York Times article here. Which if I just scroll up. And, the data here is presented in a more fashionable way. However, I found, this article is written by leftist hack journalists, so the title is "Extensive Data Shows Punishing Reach of Racism for Black Boys." While in the study, the word racism or race are not, or racist, sorry, are not mentioned once in the 107 pages, while discrimination is only mentioned in the footnotes where other studies are referenced and not the actual study itself. So, we can say the authors of this New York Times article are pulling a Shaun, so to speak, and that they are misrepresenting the study to draw conclusions that that study doesn't actually make. But nonetheless, let's look at the graph here that represents the data actually put forward in the study. So if I refresh the page here you can see the first graph, which says most white boys are raised in wealthy families which stay rich or upper middle class as adults, but black boys raised in similarly rich households will not. And you can see here is all of the men who are born in a rich family, and then they get filtered out into where they will end up as adults. And the white squares are white people, and the blue ones are black people. And already you can see rich adult is becoming a... Sorry, did I just say... Sorry. Anyway, you can see up here that rich adult is steadily becoming yellow, which is to say that it is dominated by white men, and poor adult is becoming blue. And so you can see that from rich to poor, even though the original man grew up rich, is organized from yellow to blue, from white to black, so to speak. And this will just keep going, and you get the idea. And then if we scroll down, there is another study of interest to us. And for poor children, the pattern is reversed. Most poor black boys will remain poor as adults, while white boys raised in poor families fare much better. So here you can see the opposite. Here, yellow is white, blue is black. And you can see that as they come out poor, again, the same trend reasserts itself. Rich adult is mainly yellow, that is white, and poor adult is mainly blue, that is black. So you can see that even accounting for economic condition, this trend will reassert itself. And then if we scroll down, there's some hack, some leftist hack. And here we go. The sons of black families from the top 1% had about the same chance of being incarcerated on a given day as the sons of white families earning $36,000, which is about $20,000 below the average for Americans. And you can see how this trend maintains itself. So that is pretty much the whole point here. And is there any other data here? Anyway, I think we get the point. Well, yeah, in addition, there's a meta-analysis entitled The Changing Relationship Between Income and Crime Victimization by Stephen D. Levitt, and it found a similar conclusion in regards to criminality. If we go on page 7 here, so on this graph here, which says distribution of homicide rates by median family income by community and race, we can see that black Americans in the top percentile down here, that is 10 homicides per 100,000, commit more crime by a significant margin than whites in the bottom 10%, which, so here it's double. I imagine 0.4 could be an outlier, but in 1976 to 1985, even the top 10% of wealthy blacks were committing twice as much crime, or homicides I should say, than the bottom 10% of whites. And so naturally, neither economics nor oppression from the past would account for this, because even black Americans that aren't subject to the intergenerational poverty that could be created from past oppression still display this gap in criminality. But just gonna check the chat for super chats that I might need to read out. No, we're good. Alright, let us continue.
You know, if you enslave a given race of people and prevent education and break up families and confiscate all their belongings and deny them the vote, and then subject them to a post-slavery period where for generations they're forbidden by law from attending the best schools and all the other rights afforded the majority, all these things have lasting effects. Black people in poverty in the United States are in a poverty that was in part created by this history of oppression, and that's unfair and unjust.
Well, as we just saw, a lot of the poverty is created by themselves. Blacks that inherit more than they inherit. Blacks, yeah, anyway, you get the point. We've gone over the data. You can see that blacks that inherit more than 90% of the population still commit more crime than whites that inherit the bottom 10% of wealth in the population. So there's no evidence for this at all.
Isn't it? And as a brief side note about culture here, which Roaming Millennial cites as another reason for the crime rate disparity, one particular culture is only one side of the coin. We also have to consider how that culture is perceived on the outside. Now, an individual black person might be subject to discrimination based on that perception, and any one average individual has a minimal effect on that culture as a whole. People can't always choose how they're perceived. You know, you can criticize a culture as a whole, but you can't hand-wave away longer prison sentences for individual black people because of it. That's unfair and unjust. Let's take a look at another argument of Roaming Millennials now, the Asian American argument.
And something that I'd like to mention, which really debunks the idea that non-white people in the US are oppressed, is the fact that there are non-white groups out there who on average do better than their white counterparts in terms of education and finances. And yes, felony charges too.
So then, people of colour can't be oppressed because Asian Americans, on average, are better educated and have a higher average income than white Americans. Now, does this therefore prove that oppression is now a thing of the past and has no bearing at all on modern society? Well, I would argue quite the opposite. In fact, a larger percentage of Asian Americans being educated and having a higher average income stems directly from discrimination against Asian people. And stick with me now, it's kind of a counterintuitive one, this.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's see where he goes with this.
I understand, how can discrimination against a group lead to them being, on average, better off down the line? And another question here before I answer that one. In the graph of average household incomes that Roaming Millennial showed, why doesn't the Asian data go back as far as the others? And these answers are linked, as you'll see. So I'm going to throw a few data points your way now, and we'll see if we can later draw some conclusions from them. So first of all, in 1960, the Asian population of the United States was less than 1 million. They comprised around half of 1% of the population. And this is compared to there being over 18 million black people in 1960, to give you a sense of the scale there. Today, there are around 20 million Asian Americans, so why were there so few, relatively, in 1960, and why are there comparatively so many more today? Point number 2. In 1882, the United States Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, prohibiting Chinese immigration into the United States and making the Chinese migrants present in the United States at the time permanent aliens by excluding them from the possibility of US citizenship. Point number 3. The Immigration Act of 1917, also known as the Asiatic Barred Zone Act, barred immigration from large parts of Asia completely. Point number 4. The Immigration Act of 1924, including the Asian Exclusion Act, but not to be confused with the Chinese Exclusion Act, imposed strict quotas on how many people of a particular nationality could be resident in the United States at the time, and barred completely everyone who was ineligible to become a United States citizen. Fifth, and finally here, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which removed the racial and national barriers that were previously in place, which restricted immigration from Asia. So then, why in 1960 were there a relatively small number of Asian people in the United States? And that's because immigration from Asia was massively restricted by a series of discriminatory laws. And then after those restrictions were lifted, immigration from Asia skyrocketed, relatively anyway. Now, the vast majority of Asian American population growth in recent decades has been due to immigration. So then, we need to ask, who can move to a different country? And primarily of importance to us here is people who can afford to move to a different country. And this is particularly true of a country very far away with which you do not share a land border. The average Chinese labourer cannot say, oh, I'm not feeling this really, I think I'll just move to America and buy a house and go to college. You see my point here. The United States is not seeing an accurate representative economic cross-section of people from those Asian countries.
Okay, so we get the point. I'm sorry to let that go on for so long. You know how Shaun is. He's very slow, and maybe I should have taken my own advice and found the timestamps in this video and gone through it. But you get what he's trying to say, and it's a nice statement that would make sense in Shaun's head, but wouldn't this apply to poor countries that aren't in Asia as well? Yet if we look at, say, Somali immigrants, if I go to the list of ethnic groups of immigrants by their average income, as you can see here on Wikipedia, we can see that, say, Somali Americans, their salaries are roughly half the average American, while Iraqis, Burmese, and other nationalities show similar trends. So it seems that there are plenty of counterexamples to his thesis. While also, why the fuck does the past immigration laws that restricted Asians from migrating, what does that have to do with anything if your point was to do with the economic reality of Asia? I mean, it's as if it was just another anti-American guilt trip just thrown in there just because. Like, did you know that Asians were quote-unquote oppressed 50 years ago? It has nothing to do with its overall point. But guys, that's gonna have to do it for this one. He finishes up the video here, and he just kind of reiterates some of his points, and he doesn't actually add any new information. But just one last look at the chat. I can see $2 from ha 477. The bacon cheddar McChicken was stolen from me. Sad face. I am very sorry to hear that. And yeah, I'd like to shout out to all of the super chat donors today. You guys make this doable, and also the Streamlab donors. I greatly appreciate it. It means a lot to me. I'll switch over to the before scene. So as you can see, I'm right here. For some reason, the window doesn't show up that we were just watching. But anyway, guys, read my Streamlabs. Oh yeah, that is something that Streamlabs actually does. You can actually go over and like read. I'm gonna do that right now. Sorry everybody. Sorry to Streamlab donors if you said anything. I'm going over right now to look at Rawhide's Streamlabs, and I'll read that out for you. So if you guys want to donate via Streamlab, then that's also appropriate and means a lot to me and makes this, worth my time. Just logging in. Do Streamlabs. Check out the chat. Who else is here? Where are the boys at? No, you guys are all the boys. We got Autism is Unstoppable. Nice username. We got a lot of new names here that aren't usually the same guys that are in the chat. My live streams aren't very popular for some reason. How do we see what they actually say? Okay, so we got $2 from Travis Bickle. Now watch this drive. I will watch that drive. Then we have $1.50 from Rawhide. Go to support Starbucks and other racist businesses. Maybe I will. Then we have Rawhide again with $2.27. Mother love me long time, sucky, fucky, wonton, Hong Kong, wonton, Hong Kong, wonton, one time, wonton, love me long time, feed of my long schlong, go back to Hong Kong, gong, I'll send you back to Hong Kong, pie. Alright? And then I have two from before by Eddie, Colol, which I didn't read, saying privatize the state, monarchist gang. And then is this N-word saying Christians, Jews, and Muslims get along in Spain, lol. So that must have been from a previous live stream that I did, which I didn't get around to reading. But anyway, guys, that's going to have to do it for this one. Thanks for sticking around. I greatly appreciate it. I had lots of fun. And, yeah, I'll catch you guys later. Where is this outro?
Calling all units, I repeat, calling all units. Shots are fired. I need backup right now. Shots are fired.
Mother love me long time. Sucky, fucky, one ton, Hong Kong. One ton, Hong Kong, one time. Love me long time, feed of my long schlong. Go back to Hong Kong. I'll send you back to Hong Kong. Para one ton. Love me, mother love me long time. Sucky, fucky, one ton, Hong Kong. One ton, Hong Kong, one time. Love me long time, feed of my long schlong. Go back to Hong Kong. I'll send you back to Hong Kong. Para one ton. Love me, mother love me long time. Sucky.